I'm always finding a way to get myself in trouble. So all these parts and pieces and mess, this is all part of this Thomas 2660 compressor, which is I'm personally using for pond aeration. And I bought this rebuilt probably under a year ago, like 6 months, maybe a little more. And it started making more and more noise, and then I went down there and the thing was not moving and it was hot. So it was pretty apparent that it was seized up. So what I did is I brought it up here. I shot a bunch of WD-40 all over the place. I was actually suspecting it was going to be the piston in the sleeves. And there's definitely quite a bit of scoring, but that's not why this one was locked up. So rewind to when I saw that. I popped it apart and I ordered a rebuild kit. So that's why I got parts all over the place. And when I popped it apart, I tried to turn it and it still wouldn't turn, even though I had unbolted the pistons. So it was pretty apparent that the issue was going to be inside. There's a million videos that are going to be better than mine, because I'm just trying to slam this job out, on how to do this piston and valve rebuild. And the kit was cheap, it was easy to get, and I even when it wouldn't move at first, I didn't even look at it. I just ordered a capacitor, I shot a capacitor on, then I realized it's actually locked up. So this stuff is all easy. What I couldn't find any information on at all is exactly what I'm doing right now, which is these motor main shaft bearings. So I'm going to just pull this out of the way a little bit. That bearing right there on mine is locked up. Actually, that one's good. I just did the bottom one, and that one was locked up solid. So I found this company, and they sell a couple sets of bearings. These are for the eccentrics, which is basically like a connecting rod. So this bearing right here takes a lot of beating because the piston's going up and down, and there's quite a bit of force on that equivalent of a rod bearing, the eccentric bearing. If you look, mine are moving pretty nice. So I got into it a little bit. I'm like, these are moving good. And then I tried to turn the shaft, and the shaft wouldn't move, and that's pretty buried down in there. I got no information on how to do this job, and I looked all over the internet. I downloaded all the manuals. Manuals will get you up to these bearings. And so my focus is going to more be these main shaft bearings. So let me show you. Here's the one I just pulled. And I'm even with one hand, but with two hands I can't turn it either. See, it's all spinning as an assembly. This bearing's locked up. And you see a little bit of rust right there, which that may be part of its demise. It got a little wet. We had a lot of rain, and I left the lid off, so this compressor got some water, so probably my fault. But if it happened to me, it probably happened to somebody else. So to get to this point, follow the manual to pull these off. It's really easy. I'll even back up on when I'm reassembling, and I'll go over a little bit more about how to get it apart. These weren't that hard. There's just a set screw, an Allen right there. I'll even cover how to do these, because again, this was easy. Where it got difficult is how to get those out of the case right here, the aluminum case. So a couple things I found out. I've got this puller set. So again, this is not real super DIY unless you happen to have a puller, or you want to go to Harbor Freight and get yourself a puller. But basically, when I got it apart, I used an air hammer and I just buzzed down on that shaft a little bit, and that gave me a little crack right here. And once I got the crack right there, because there's no bolts holding these two case halves together to the motor. It's just the press fit of the bearings. So you just got to open it up a little bit so I could get the little ears of the puller in there. And then I'm going to try to set my camera in a way that you can zoom out of here. So the whole jam after that is getting the puller arms under the lip, and then I'm going to start to spin that center, like I guess what they would call the arbor of the puller. So the threaded rod right now I'm threading. So I'm trying to get it tightened up and have everything sit just right. So that one's just barely grabbing, so it should be, well, problem is if I look at my shaft in there, I'm just barely catching. So pardon the bad view while I get this rigged up. And I know a lot of stuff about bearings, so I could share a little insight on that. I am just barely catching an edge, so let me rig this up. And I hate messy workspaces. I just got one project after the next I haven't really cleaned up. I brought it over here where I could see a little better. So with these jaws under the bottom grabbing the case, the center threaded part, the arbor, is touching the shaft. I'm going to use it as a puller. Might take a couple tries. It's going to try to pop off there. Because again, this is, there's probably a very specific special tool made for this exact job, but not something I have, and I'm never going to do another one of these unless this one fails again, and it probably will. So I'm not really looking to invest in buying tools for just onesies and twosies use, so I'm making do with what I got. Alright, so I wish I had another hand. If you could reach out and help me, that'd be great. Try to hold these in a little better. Okay, so that went a little different than planned, but not in a terrible way. So let me unthread this here. So here's what happened. The puller, I'm going to lay that housing down. The puller was pulling the bearing, and it was basically, this is the inner race, that inner silver part. The inner race was sliding up the shaft, and I saw it. It was looking good. Then it caught the edge, and the edge, if you look, it's a little bit mushroomed right there. See that? We call that mushroomed. That was because I smacked it with the air hammer to get a little bit of a crack. So I caused that. I didn't see it until the bearing stopped sliding. So what I should have done was filed that down. Now I'm a little stuck, but I got a plan to work around. What would have happened, the bearing would have stayed in here. So the inner race is press fit to the shaft, and this outer race is press fit to the housing. So normally the bearing would be in the housing, and you're going to see that when I reassemble it. So at this point, what I would do is I'd get a socket the exact size of this outer race, but just maybe a little smaller so it doesn't get wedged in the housing, and I just blast it out. Boom, just like that. You could just hit it anywhere really, because you're going to ruin this old bearing getting it off, and that's why press fit bearings, you can only pull it and put it back. You pull it off and ruin it, and then put a new one on. You really can't realistically expect to reuse a bearing. So let me show you my rig for this. So here's the next step. This is a bearing splitter. That's gonna grab the bearing like that. But then I still don't really have a good way to pull it. So most bearing splitters have these threaded holes down here. Hardly anybody realizes this is what it's for. But they have these studs you can thread into the screws, into the holes. And then I'll take this apart real quick, and if you note, and this is a cheapy puller set, but kind of just knowing how to use a basic puller set can get you a lot of stuff done. So now I got a rig to pull, so let me set this up. Alright, so I'm a flat rater to the max, so I didn't even tighten these bolts up, but great idea. Tighten these bolts up, get everything tight, make sure it's perfect. I'm going to just try to hold it. Now, I may make a fool of myself if I have to, stop what I'm doing and do this, but a lot of times I can just hold it, save myself the time. Got most of it, not all of it. As you can see, the gear puller, the gear splitter, bearing splitter is trying to open up. So I may have to tighten those bolts. Yeah. It's alright. I could do that. Gotta grab a different size socket though. But that's the idea. Let me tighten those up properly. Alright, here we go. Sometimes I like to put these the other way around so the flat side bumps the bearing, but this will work fine. And it's also more stuck than it should be because of that mushroom shaft from my air hammer deal. I'm figuring this out on my own, like I said. The only reason I'm making this, I'm probably not even the best guy to make it. There's people who do this repeatedly, I'd imagine. There is no videos, so here we go. Okay, so there's our bearing pulled off. Pain in the butt, but it's pulled. Now I'm gonna get rid of this rig, and I wanna, the rest of this will be done with pretty simple basic tools, but there's concepts you need to know. All right, here we go. So here's the bearing. That's the part number, FYI. Here's that old one, and this one is decent, but the other one was locked up solid. You can see I can spin this one. So this was what we just pulled off. I had to set it back on there. So if I get this laid down here, the first step is going to be driving the bearing, the outer race, into that housing. Here's how you do it. Take your bearing, find your socket. Hopefully you have one that fits it pretty perfect, right? Like we want the socket, the rim of the socket, sitting on the outer race, not in the middle and not on the inner race, because if you push load through that bearing is going to be damaged. We're going to isolate the outer race with the socket being pressed into the outer housing, so no force is being put through the bearing itself, just the outer race to the part that it's pressed into. Kind of a weird concept, but this is the socket. So I'm going to set my bearing right there where it goes. Now if you know a little bit, you could heat this aluminum housing and you could freeze the bearing. You could do a few different things, but this is how I'm going to do it. So I set it in there, and I'm not going to use a hammer. I'm going to air hammer it. I get it nice and straight, and I'm going to set the socket on there. That'll hold it right where it needs to be, and I'm just going to blip it in with the air hammer. All right, I got to look, see if I'm crooked, make sure I steer it a little bit. All right, recheck it a little bit. Alright, I'm looking at my depth. I need to really match the old depth. I got to go just another 0.5 millimeter. Alright, perfect. Time for a new concept. Next concept is about the inner race. I'm going to take this old bearing here. So again, this inner race needs to be press fit onto this shaft. That's going to take a different approach. And remember, I found that mushroomed issue. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to locate where that problem is. Looks like it may be, I'll zoom in a little. To get fancy, you could get like a micrometer and measure where the largest part is, but this doesn't have to be perfect rocket science. Like it's oh, there it is right there. It's got a little lip right there that I can catch with my fingernail. I'm gonna take that off with a file. In my youth and impatience, I ought to try to ramrod this sucker on, but I'm gonna try to hook it up. It's gonna slow me down a little, but it's gonna end up saving me in the end, because this bearing's not gonna get jammed on there and then possibly damaged. A little tough to get this file to sit on there straight. I'm using my tiny file too, but I like this one. Okay, I'm happy with it. All right, another cool concept. The reason that shaft doesn't have to be perfect is because it's not actually a friction surface. The friction surface is within the inner race, which is brand new and right there. So all I really need to do is have it decent enough to have that inner race fit, press fit tightly, but not so tight that it won't go on or mess it up. So the next step, I've got to get these a little lined up. Actually got to remember which way it goes first. And I got my wires not really helping me out a whole lot. So it's going to go on just like this. Now as you can see, it looks like, you know, I'm going to make sure my housing is lined up, but it doesn't look like that's super critical, so I can't mess that up. But this is the part that trips a lot of rookies up. It's my job to teach entry-level tech, so when I go to push this bearing in, I've made this mistake, so I'm not putting anybody down. When I go to push this bearing in, you have to understand all your force needs to go to this inner race, and you see it says China, so that tells you what you need to know. The force needs to go to the inner race, because your inner race currently, we're trying to drive it into the inner shaft, right? So I'm fighting with this inner race fitting to that inner shaft. But that inner race is beefy, it could take it. But if I were to screw up, right, and I were to push on the outer race right now, the outer race would push on the ball bearings. The ball bearings would try to push on the inner race. This is a ball bearing. It's not made for this axial load, like up and down. It doesn't have strength like that. It's got strength, you know, radially, in the radius of the bearing. Yes, but if you don't do this right, you ruin the bearing. I'd say ask me how I know, but I think I already gave you a clue on that. So I found a socket that's going to fit the inner race, right? Not the outer race, but the inner race. It can be a little bit big, but it really has to catch this whole ridge. It can't be only out here on the black part, because that's where the ball bearings are. The black part's the seal that seals the grease in the ball bearings. The other problem, if you look in there, the socket's hollow. It can't be so tight that it's going to bind on the shaft, right? So I'm going to start working this down, and then what's going to happen is the shaft is going to go up inside the socket. So what would actually be a better fit for this job would be a piece of pipe. If I had a piece of pipe that fit the inner race but was big enough to slip over the shaft, I could do it. But what's going to happen, I already did it with the socket. This one just barely works. But what's going to happen is the socket's going to start to get stuck on the shaft, and I'm going to keep making sure that it stays loose so it doesn't get totally stuck. And then the socket's got to be long enough to drive this thing all the way down and really get these two pieces of seat. So this is the part that gets a little tricky, so listen up. All right, here we go. And because I'm banging on the floor, and I like this floor, it's brand new, it's a lot of money, I put a little board down. It's going to be better for the compressor housing on the bottom. Make sure it sits nice and flat. It's actually sitting on the shaft a little bit. And then it's also going to be better for the floor. So here's the jam. Ready? This is sitting on the inner race. I'm going to make sure I hold it straight and give it a little correction if needed. You could do this with a hammer if you had to. Do a little more. Show you how we're working here. Alright, so as you can see, the bearing's going on. It's past that spot that I had to file. Looking clean. If you'll note, that inner race does not spin when I turn the bearing, because now the bearing is doing its job. If you're doing this and it starts to feel like it's binding up and feels bad, you just ruined yourself a bearing. So that's the key, right? And you'll notice this one will just, right on that inner race, I'm going to drive this baby in. I'll get it kind of buttoned up and then I'll debrief. Let's check this out. I got it where it's just about touching right now. But what I need to do to be really careful, I need to just go nice and slow and get those to seat. You can see a little crack there. That one's just about sealed. That's where the wires would have gone, but the wires end up on this side here. So maybe that shouldn't have been open, but it was on this one. And now I know what they mean by rebuilt. They put these Chinese main shaft bearings in there. So these ones should be better. So I'm just real carefully just going to blip this down. Get you positioned where you maybe can see a little bit. A little janky tripod here. Alright, here we go. Okay, looks like a touch more, making sure my socket's not getting stuck on me now. Just like a touch more on that one. Okay. Now, well, actually, I got to go just a little more on this side. I just saw my socket was trying to get stuck on this side earlier, so I got to be real careful. But I'm just going to kind of equalize these two right here and just get it so the shaft is even, and just get this last little bit to close up. So I thought about this. I'm actually going to pop this out of the tripod. I had every intention of changing these eccentric bearings because I'm right here. But you know what? Something tells me I'm going to be back in this compressor because this thing runs 12 hours a day, 365. So I think I'm going to save those bearings. But if you look at this, it's not really going to be that difficult. It's going to be a matter of pressing the center part out of the center race, the middle race. And I was looking at it, and I would probably lay it up on a couple blocks that support this little connecting rod and blast it out of there. That's probably going to mess up the old bearing, which is fine. And then the thing would be to get a big old socket or a big circular part, right, to support the rod, and then get another big part to support the outer race, drive the outer race right into the rod, and then get a socket to support the inner race, lay it on the socket, and then drive this counterweight or whatever, the centerpiece into that inner race. So it really wouldn't be crazy. It's the same type of concept. And again, that was in the manual, but nowhere to talk about these motor bearings. So hopefully this helps somebody, but I'm also looking to jam this out and get it back to aerating. It's been down a month. So that's going to be the end. You know, on second thought, I realized I was on my own getting this thing apart, and there was no videos getting down to this level, so I should probably show you a little bit more. All right, I'm going to put this connecting rod assembly back. That little set screw, that's an Allen, was on the flat part of this shaft, so I'm going to be ready for that. Now what I found is I'm going to put the flat side of the shaft up, so that way I can slide this little rod down in here. Okay, and I'm just kind of lining it up, and there it goes. And, you know, I guess there's actually going to be a little, I can account for centering this. So I may not actually tighten this up, but I'll show you how to tighten it up. I had to get an Allen, come through here, and go for that screw, but obviously that side would have to be down, right? So there's a hole in the bottom of the compressor, come through here, grab hold of that sucker, and I could kind of set it, but you know what I was thinking? If I put the cylinders in, and then I could make sure I've really got the piston where I want it, because right now I can adjust it along the axis of the shaft. So I'm going to hold off on that for right now, and I'm going to button this cylinder up real quick. So I'm going for this. Like I said, there's a million videos on this, but I kept, my mind's pretty good at remembering some things, and so I'm just going to kind of run this thing together, and then what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to set this cylinder in here with the cup. You know, the new seal is going to be on, and it's a little tricky. Slip it on there, baby. Got it too far out. All right, so if I've got that in there, what I'm really trying to do right now is I'm trying to get this, if you look down here, I feel like it needs to be over a little more. Right, so I'm kind of going around and I'm looking to make sure I got it sitting right where it was. And then when I'm happy, then I'm going to go ahead and tighten that Allen up. And there was a torque spec in the manual. It was fairly tight. Trying to get the right angle here. My other observation was basically if I lay this connecting rod down and clunk it, if you listen, clunk it right to the bottom, that's too low. If I pick it up a hair, that was about right looking on the old marks. And so that's going to be my spot. Now my shaft turned a little bit, so I got to make sure I'm back on there. Right about there. And I just think if you don't have it centered, I believe, being a non-compressor expert, but knowing one or two things, that's probably why this has so much wear on one side of this cylinder. Was the piston, if this cylinder was like this, with all the wear on the bottom, that piston was probably set too far center, you know, so it could have been stood off a little bit from the housing. So that's a guess. I don't know who rebuilt this, and this is the one and only that I've ever done, but take it for what it is. So now I feel like I got my piston where I want it, and I'm going to button this up and change the valves, and the videos are great on those, so I can't help you with that. But hopefully this did help something with somebody. Oh, and one last thing. The frickin' fans. So when that's tight to spec, the fans, let me show you, that one I cracked trying to figure it out. This one is going to be good. The fans really just have the flat spot. I noticed this fan must have been an aftermarket change. There's no flat spot. This fan, and you can see what I broke, has a flat on it. So anyway, when I went to get these off, there's this little hose clamp that you got to squeeze. I don't think you'll be able to squeeze it. But I found if I pulled by the blades, it cracked. But if I was able to just barely sneak a little hook pick in here and grab like down here where it's a little bit stronger and just tweak it a little bit and spin the shaft and spin the fan, I was able to carefully work it off. So that would be your first step. Pull this cover, which mine was missing, pull the fan, then you'll access that bolt. And that's assuming you got the head off. You access that bolt, pull that apart, and then you can catch up on the main shaft bearings or whatever. Maybe you're just doing the eccentric bearings. But hopefully that does help somebody. I gotta go.